Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General Bondi. I have noticed that at various times when one of my colleagues is pressing you, you come up with something in their background. So I'll be waiting for my turn.
This exchange between Senator Peter Welch and Attorney General Pam Bondi deserves more attention than it's getting.
But you don't have to do it right now. So let me get to my questions. One of the things that you mentioned, and I agree with this, that it's really tough on the various federal workforce, including our law enforcement folks, who are not getting paid because of the shutdown. Mm-hmm. I agree with that. But I also think that wasn't the whole story. There is an issue here that's going to affect Americans, whether they voted for President Trump or voted for Vice President Harris, and that is the loss of health care, where on November 1st, everyone who is getting Affordable Care Act help to buy insurance is going to get the notice of premium increases. And I got a letter just today from a Vermont family, nuclear family of 5, husband and wife, 54 and 55, with 3 kids, one of whom has acute myeloid leukemia. And the apprehension that they have is that if we don't solve this problem, and November 1 is a urgent date, then their family premiums will triple. It'll be beyond their ability to pay. So I'm assuming that with respect to the threat to health care for families in your state of Florida, in my state of Vermont, you would share that concern and hope that we would resolve that.
Senator Welch, I would be happy to speak with that family too, because there are many nonprofits that help with children with terminal illnesses, and I'm involved in some in Florida. So we would be happy to talk to you about that. As to health care, the government is shut down. It's my understanding, maybe you're not one of them, but because many Democrats want health care for illegal aliens, and that's what shut down the government.
Let me be clear.
That's one of the sticking points, and I don't know if you voted for that or not.
This actually is important to all of us, and the lament I have is that if this health care goes away, this premium support, it is really going to hurt families in red states and blue states. And in Vermont, I mean, we voted Democratic, but we have a lot of good folks who voted for President Trump, and their health care is jeopardized. And there's a November 1 deadline that is coming up. And the reason I'm saying this is that I think it's important for us to try to work out together a resolution that's going to be beneficial to people you care about in Florida and voted for President Trump, and keep people I care about in Vermont who voted in some cases for Vice President Harris and some for President Trump. So it's not just Democrats not wanting to negotiate. And in fact, we do want to negotiate. And that's why I'd encourage the president to encourage my colleagues on the Republican side to sit down with us and try to see if we can make some progress. Another topic, with the respective voting rights in the letter that your voting rights chief sent out, we got one in Vermont, and it's a demand to get all the information on the voting file. And in that letter, in the announcement of that letter, the chief indicated an apprehension about the voting process being taken over by, quote, the left. Now, do you have any information with respect to Vermont about a takeover of the voting process by, quote, the left?
Senator, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to. We are currently involved in voter roll lawsuits in 6 states. Is that what you're referring to?
No, there's a letter that went out demanding that states, including Vermont, provide all the voting file information,
right.
Includes personal information. But when that letter was sent out—
That's perfectly legal.
But there was an assertion by the chief in this division that this was to deal with the fact that the voting process has been taken over by the left. So we got one of those letters in Vermont. And my question to you is, what do you mean by the left? And do you have any evidence that the so-called system has been overtaken by the left?
We must have fair and free elections.
No, I know that, but I'm asking for the specific basis.
And we will have fair and free elections in this country.
Okay,
Senator, I'd be happy to talk to my chief. Who was it who said that?
It was your chief, which I assume you would know who that is. Here's the question here, okay? There is a point of view that is in dispute here about the fairness of elections. But you have the power as the as the Attorney General to use the authority of your office to make demands on states, and you did that with Vermont. That's within your right to do it. I'm not disputing your legal authority to do it.
Is Vermont disputing turning over the information to our office?
Vermont is. The Secretary of State is. And you can resolve that with her. And
we have every right to have that information.
Yeah, here's
Senator.
where I'm going.
Why wouldn't they want to turn it over?
You're a prosecutor with the awesome authority to make the decision that you're going to start an investigation against the state or against an individual. And I know from your experience as a county prosecutor and as the Attorney General in Florida, you took seriously that obligation to have a factual basis before you'd proceed, right?
Senator, I take that role, I take my oath very seriously.
All right, so what I'm
and I
asking
take fair and free elections in this country very seriously. And that information, our office is entitled to have that information. And we are involved in litigation on that. And I assume we'll be involved in litigation with Vermont.
We have a Republican governor in Vermont. We had our former Republican governor was the treasurer for many years, and also the Secretary of State with election responsibility. What I'm asking is, do you or does your head of this voting section have any factual basis that you can point to that justifies your demand that Vermont turn over all this confidential voting rights information?
Well, it would remain confidential with my office, and you just said that you have a Republican governor, so it doesn't make sense what you just said. We've asked that of every state, Senator.
Right, and I'm asking about Vermont and what the factual basis is, but we can move on. You've mentioned that you can't discuss pending litigation, and I think the committee by and large accepted that answer. But I did notice that you spoke at great length about pending litigation, specifically with respect to the questions Senator Cruz asked you about the sentencing of the Kavanaugh defendant. That's pending, right?
He was sentenced to 8 years.
I understand that, but that's on appeal, right?
We will be appealing.
Right, so that makes it pending litigation. So you made an exception with respect to the Cruz questions.
Hold on. No,
but you didn't answer any of the questions that you said were pending litigation from any of my colleagues.
Those were facts that came out at the sentencing hearing. You're welcome to see the transcript of the sentencing hearing
I understand
with all the
that.
gruesome details of what they threatened to do to Justice Kavanaugh and other justices.
I condemn what that person did.
That was the sentencing.
But the point here is that that's pending litigation. You indicated you're going to be appealing. It's your right to do that. And you would not, you use that justification to not answer many other questions.
Justification? You're an attorney, Senator.
Okay.
You realize that.
I do want to go back to Homan. There's a tape, right, with Mr. Homan? I mean, first of all, is there a tape that has audio and video of the transfer of the $50,000?
You would have to talk to Director Patel about that.
No, I'm talking to you.
I don't know the answer, Senator.
Yeah, you do know the answer to that.
Don't call me a liar.
I didn't call you a liar.
You just said I know the answer. I said I don't know the answer.
Well,
you have to talk to Director Patel. What I said is that investigation was closed.
If you don't know, why don't you know whether there was a tape and video?
Senator, I believe that was resolved prior to my confirmation as Attorney General.
Do you think that it is of public interest for the people to know what happened to the $50,000 that the FBI turned over to Homan?
Did you hear what I just said? That was resolved prior to my confirmation as Attorney General. That's why I said I would not know.
It's not resolved. There's $50,000. Homan has it, or somebody has it. Do you have no interest in knowing where it is?
You're not going to sit here and slander Tom Homan. The FBI and Deputy Director Blanche said there was nothing.
I'm not slamming
in that.
Tom Homan. He got the 50
Tom
grand.
Homan is doing, how do you know that? Tom Homan is doing a great job, as our borders are, keeping your border state safe. You're a border state.
Thank you, Senator Welch. We're going to...
All right, let's talk about what really happened in this exchange. Because on the surface, it looks like a policy disagreement. But underneath it, this was a clash over accountability, consistency, and whether power is being used to clarify the truth or to dodge it. Senator Welch starts off in a way that's almost disarming. There's a touch of dry humor. He jokes that he's noticed Attorney General Bondi has a habit of bringing up senators' backgrounds when she's under pressure. He says he'll wait his turn. That's not hostility. That's a warning shot wrapped in civility. Then he pivots to substance. Welch acknowledges something Bondi had already said, that government shutdowns hurt federal workers, including law enforcement officers who suddenly aren't getting paid. And he agrees with her. That's important. This wasn't a gotcha question. This was common ground. At the end, Welch pivots to Tom Homan and a reported $50,000 transfer involving the FBI. He asks a simple, factual question. Is there audio and video of that transfer? Bondi says she doesn't know and tells him to ask Director Patel. Welch presses, not aggressively, persistently. Why wouldn't the Attorney General know whether there's a tape? Why wouldn't that matter? Bondi snaps back. You don't know the answer. Don't call me a liar. You're not going to sit here and slander Tom Homan. And that's the moment where tone overtakes substance. Because Welch never accused her of lying. He didn't slander Homan. He asked whether the public has a right to know where $50,000 went, money tied to a federal investigation. Bondi repeatedly says it was resolved before her confirmation. Welch points out the obvious. The money still exists. Someone has it, and the public might reasonably want to know who. Instead of clarity, the response becomes defensive. Instead of transparency, we get procedural walls. What makes this exchange linger isn't the volume of the voices or some explosive one-liner. It's the slow accumulation of unresolved questions. This wasn't theater. It was a reminder of how power actually works in these rooms and how easily responsibility can get blurred when the answers are uncomfortable. Senator Welch didn't come in swinging. He didn't treat the Attorney General like an enemy. He treated her like a public servant who should be able to explain her choices and her standards. And that's the part that keeps echoing for me, the gap between what the public expects from an Attorney General and what they sometimes receive instead. When Welch talked about health care, he wasn't talking about abstractions or ideology. He was talking about timing, deadlines, letters going out, families opening mail and realizing they may no longer be able to afford to stay alive or keep their kids healthy. That's not left-wing or right-wing. That's human. And when that concern gets rerouted into talking points about immigration or blame shifting, it sends a message, intentional or not, that some problems are treated as political inconveniences instead of emergencies. And then there's the issue of consistency. This is where trust really breaks down. If pending litigation means you can't answer questions, then it has to mean that every time for everyone. Once exceptions start appearing, once some senators get full explanations and others get stone walls, the standard collapses. At that point, it's no longer about legal prudence. It's about discretion, and discretion without transparency breeds suspicion. The $50,000 question may sound small to some people. In Washington terms, it's pocket change. But symbolically, it's massive. Because if no one can say, clearly, confidently, where federal money ended up, who handled it, and why the public shouldn't care, then the system starts to feel unaccountable by design. And notice how quickly the tone shifted when that question wouldn't go away. Not clarification. Not documentation. But offense. Defensiveness. Accusations of slander. That reaction matters because it reveals how fragile transparency can be when it collides with loyalty, politics, or reputation. Public servants shouldn't fear scrutiny, they should expect it, especially when they hold one of the most powerful legal offices in the country. What Senator Welch exposed here wasn't just a disagreement with Pam Bondi. He exposed a governing style, one that prioritizes control of the narrative over clarity and flexibility over firm standards. And that should concern people across the political spectrum. Because today it's a Democratic senator asking these questions. Tomorrow it could be a Republican one. Today it's about health care subsidies and an unexplained transfer. Tomorrow it could be about something much bigger, something with consequences that can't be brushed aside or redirected. At the end of the day, accountability doesn't belong to one party. It belongs to the public. And moments like this force us to ask whether the systems we rely on are built to serve the people or to shield those in power from having to answer hard questions. That's why this exchange matters. Not because of who looked strong or who got defensive, but because it pulled back the curtain just enough for us to see how fragile transparency can be and how much vigilance it actually takes to protect it. If you appreciate videos like this, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it. And seriously, let me know in the comments, was this a reasonable use of pending litigation? Or did Senator Welch expose a double standard that should worry all of us?